We started now?
Okay, fine. Yeah, you can start it.
Okay. Good
Anindya,
afternoon.
you are Anindya?
Yes, ma'am. I am Anindya. Ma'am, with your permission, I am starting. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another eJuris Day program organized by Center for Legal Studies, Geetharathan International Business School. Geetharathan International Business School was established in the year 2004. GIBS is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indus University, Delhi, and is approved by All India Council for Technical Education, Ministry of HRD, for its technical courses and Bar Council of India for its law courses. The institute has been accredited as A+ consecutively 8 years by Joint Inspection Team of Guru Gobind Singh Indus University and Government of NCT of Delhi. The institute currently conducts undergraduate courses like BBA, BA LLB, and BBA, BBA LLB, and postgraduate courses like MBA and MBA International Business. The theme or topic for today's eJuris Day program is Emerging Trends in Family Law, with special focus on issues or current issues like surrogacy, live-in relationship, and issues like succession and same-sex marriage. And today we do have our honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Kehkashan Daniel ma'am with us. Ma'am, we welcome you on behalf of Geetharathan International Business School Center for Legal Studies for accepting our request to be participant and speaker in this program. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am has a rich career in academics and in practice. She has been a brief stint as a practicing advocate, and then she moved on to academics. She has been actively participating in various moot court programs, various legal aid programs, and various legal awareness programs. Ma'am has authored 2 books and published more than 10 articles in various national international journals. She has also been member of Delhi State Legal Service Authority from time to time. Ma'am, we are honored and we are delighted that you are speaker for this session. Now, without wasting further time, I would request our honorable speaker to take the session forward. Up to you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. Although the time was very short, so I had to just rush to prepare everything. But then still everything is fine. I have been asked to speak on emerging trends in family law, especially problems of surrogacy, same-sex marriages, live-in relationships, and the succession, latest judgment of succession, which has come in 2020. Now, we call them emerging trends because traditionally these concepts are not a part of our society. They are not a part of our family laws. The concept of surrogacy, same-sex marriages, live-in relationships, that were traditionally not a part of our family laws. Because our family laws, or we can call it personal laws, they basically deal with the marriage, divorce, maintenance, inheritance. And if we look at Muslims, it also deals with the problems of dower, payment of dower also. So due to the fast technological developments in the field of virtual world, the internet, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, and we are very closely associated with people around the world. Although we can say the world has become a global village. Like, although we might be thousands of miles from people in the world, but still, because we have because of these developments in the field of technology, we have virtually come so close to each other. So we are very, we know what is happening around us. We know what is happening in the world. We know the practices, we know the behaviors, we know the lifestyles of people in the world, and they also know ours. So we can say that what is happening in India is known to everybody in the world, and what is happening in the world around is also known to us through all these closeness of this virtual world. Now, as a result of this, we start adopting the lifestyles, practices, and cultures of other countries. And what happens is, so because of the adoption of these technologies and lifestyles of other countries, we have now surrogacy with us. We will look into what is surrogacy, what are the advantages of surrogacy, and what are the problems which in India this problem arises because of surrogacy. And then we have live-in relations also, because they are also there in other countries. With live-in relations also there might be problems coming up. Then because now we are following these practices, but our laws are not there to regulate them, because the personal laws are not well equipped, or we can say the family laws are not well equipped to deal with such kind of problems which arise because of these practices. So we can say that in case of surrogacy, there can be problems of legitimacy. There can be problems of maybe if the parties break up, what will happen to the children? Or there are other problems as well, which I'm going to deal when I deal with surrogacy. Then we have in case of live-in relationship, they live like a family. So again, there can be problems related to the partner and relating to the partner, as well as the children born of these live-in relationships. So these are there. So since there are no provisions in our family laws to deal with problems which crop up because of these practices, so the burden shifts to the judiciary. So the judiciary has to take care. There are a number of cases in which the judiciary has come forward and given decisions, maybe to support the human rights of these people, or to give protection to the children born of such practices. But then it is still, then when we talk of succession, if you look at the Shastric Hindu law, or the journey of women's property rights from the Shastric Hindu law to the 2005 amendment, there have been a number of reforms, but still there are certain discriminatory provisions still there. And in one of the judgments in 2020, Vinita Sharma, the court has tried to bring about women emancipation by dealing with one of the discriminatory practices which was there. So can we have the next slide, please? Surrogacy. Now, surrogacy, it can be called as an emerging trend in family law. It can be discussed in relation to the concept of adoption, because adoption is a part of Hindu family law. It is available only to Hindus. It is recognized only to Hindus. Now, prior to the passing of the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act 1956, what was the need for adoption? We are discussing adoption because we'll come to surrogacy from there, the need for a child. Now, adoption, the main purpose of marriage was to beget a son. And it is said that adoption is equally important as an institution of marriage, because under the Shastric Hindu law, the institution of sonship was considered very important, in the sense to have a son was considered mandatory for every Hindu. Begetting a son was one of the 3 debts to ancestors that a Hindu was required to discharge in this world. So son is called a putra. That is one who delivers from hell, called put, P-U-T, put, hell. So in that case, the son was, through a son one could conquer the world. Through a grandson obtain immortality. And through a great-grandson one ascends to the highest heaven. So that was the importance of having a son. So the concept of adoption was there. It was basically through a religious ceremony. It was a spiritual act. Only sons could be adopted. Daughters could not be adopted. And if a widow, if the husband died without leaving a son, the widow, whenever she adopted a child, maybe 1 year after, 2 years after, or 10 years after the death of the husband, the adoption used to relate back to the date of the death of the husband, meaning thereby we can say a fiction is that the husband did not die without leaving a son. So it is a son who used to give, a Mukhagni used to give that also. Now also it is a son who does that. So that is the importance of having a son. So what happened was, the concept was that if there is no son in a family, the family used to adopt a child. And the adoption used to date back, the adopted son even now after the passing of the 1956 Act is just similar to a natural born son, and the date the child is adopted now, it is the date of like the birth of the child. So then the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act 1956 was passed. Now it was no longer a religious ceremony or a spiritual act. It became a secular act. That means there were religious ceremony of Datta Homam was dispensed with, and though a daughter could also be adopted under the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act. And adopted child was just like a natural born child here also. Please don't turn the slide now, because fine, I'll just come to surrogacy. So adoption is called a process of legitimation, whereby the relations of the child get severed from the original family and he becomes a part of the other family. So now what happens is, why we are looking at adoption is to find out the reasons why people want to go for surrogacy. Since the technology was available, the couples who could not procreate, who could not beget a child earlier, such couples would adopt a child, which used to be like their natural born child. So what happened? The time came when these couples started having a desire to have their own genetic or biological child, because adopted child is not genetically their own. So they said that one thing was to have their own genetic or biological child, and the other was, after the case of Lakshmikant Pandey versus Union of India, 1984, the CARA guidelines were laid down, and it is really a very difficult process to adopt a child, because there's a long queue of people who are waiting for adoption. So people thought it is better to have their own child instead of going for adoption. So these couples take the help of surrogacy arrangements. Now, first of all, we have to see what is the meaning of surrogacy. The origin is a Latin word surrogatus, which means a substitution or a replacement. It means a person who is appointed to act on the place of another. So who is a surrogate mother? The surrogate mother is that mother who agrees to carry and deliver a child for another couple. It is basically a blessing, or we can call surrogacy as a miracle of science. And by this process, a number of people have got children. They have families where no child was there, so they have been able to fulfill their desire of having their own child. So it is basically an arrangement between a woman, wherein a woman gives her consent to bring into life a child with the assistance of ART technology, assisted reproductive technology. She carries a child to full-term pregnancy with the intention to hand over the child to the intended couple on whose behalf she is carrying the child. Now, surrogate mother who consents to have an embryo to be generated by merging the oocytes of another woman, maybe with the sperm of the husband of that other woman, and once that embryo develops in a lab, it is put in the body of the surrogate mother, and where the child develops. So till delivery of the child, she carries the child as if it is her own child. So either she agrees to bear a child for another woman. So there are two types of surrogacy. Next slide. Traditional and gestational. In case of traditional surrogacy, in case of traditional one, the commissioning mother plays no role. The commissioning mother, that is the intended couple's wife, she doesn't play a role. The woman who agrees to be a surrogate mother provides her own egg to be fertilized by artificial insemination. She carries a fetus and finally gives birth to the child for another couple. So the surrogate mother is the biological or genetic mother. That is, how is the child conceived? Through artificial insemination by using the sperm, the frozen sperms, and that embryo is impregnated with the help of either intrauterine insemination or intracervical insemination, which is performed professionally in a health clinic. Now, this child Yes, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. You are
Actually,
audible. Kindly turn on your camera.
There was a connectivity.
Yes.
It is on.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, you are audible. It's perfectly fine.
So actually there was a connectivity problem. So the other one is gestational surrogacy. The child has a genetic combination of the commissioning parents. That is, the embryo is created through the method of IVF in a lab or a test tube by combining the genes of both the intended parents, and then that embryo is implanted in the surrogate mother's womb. She carries the pregnancy for the whole term, and then the child finally is delivered to the intending parents. Now, that means in this case, the intended parents couple are the genetic parents of the child. And the child has two mothers, the genetic mother and the gestational mother. Now, reasons for this kind of surrogacy is congenital absence of the uterus maybe, or repeated miscarriages, that the woman is not able to carry the child. The repeated miscarriages and chance of carrying a child is very remote. Now, in case of traditional surrogacy, the reasons can be that the sperms, the ovaries of women are not functional maybe, or there are chances of passing a genetic disease to the child offspring, or she's suffering from some chronic life-threatening disease. So she goes for this kind of surrogacy. Now, on the basis of monetary consideration, the surrogacy arrangements are of two kinds, commercial and altruistic. In case of commercial surrogacy, it is the woman is paid additional monetary consideration apart from her reasonable or medical expenses. She is given money. So it is basically monetary consideration. There have been a number of cases of foreigners coming to India and using these poor women, illiterate women, for these surrogacy arrangements, and then maybe it's a kind of a two-way process. Even the women have benefited from them. They have earned money, and there are cases. One of my students did a thesis, a PhD on this topic. So there were a number of women in Gujarat who have really benefited. They have got their own houses built by the money. Maybe they went for the surrogacy arrangement twice or thrice. So they have their own houses also. At least they have that money for that. So in case of altruistic surrogacy, but this commercial surrogacy has been banned prohibited by all the regulation bills which have been passed. Now commercial surrogacy has been banned. But altruistic surrogacy is when it is done by a close friend or a relative. That is altruistic surrogacy. That is, there is no financial reward required except for the reasonable medical expenses, and in certain cases they do not take that also. Maybe there was a movie also on this. There was Tabu and Sushmita Sen in that movie, where one of the friends, because she was not able to conceive, so one of the friend decided to go and have a surrogate child for her own friend. Then you have there was a case in Gujarat also where the daughter was not able to maybe conceive, and the daughter's eggs and the husband's eggs were they were in the test tube. They were egg and embryo was formed, and then embryo was implanted into the womb of the mother, the daughter's mother, and she delivered a child for them. There is also cases like there's a case called Casey. There is a case of Casey which was in September 2012, and there also it became a problem that it was discussed in the court also, this case. So advantages of surrogacy is that they have their own genetically own child. It is an opportunity to single fathers and infertile couples or age-old couples. Now there can be same-sex couples or unmarried women. They can all go for surrogacy. Now the problem arises. Next slide, please. The problem arises in India. We can have the problem of legal status of the child. What is the legal status of the child? So because it is a controversial issue, it affects the surrogate child in respect of the question whether the child is legitimate or illegitimate. Because status of child is very important, because from the status itself, there is a foundation of many rights of the child, like custody, maintenance, inheritance, etc. So if a surrogate child is considered illegitimate, it is an injustice to the intended couple, parents as well as the surrogate child. So it is said legitimacy is the direct result of institution of marriage. If a child is born during lawful wedlock, he is legitimate. If a child is born out of a lawful wedlock, it is considered illegitimate. So where the commissioning parents provide the genetic material for the embryo, there can be rare problems in that, because it is the genetic material of the parents itself. Now the problem arises where only one party out of the intended parents is contributing the genetic material. In that situation, if both the intended parents do not contribute the genetic material, there is a likelihood of some kind of objections regarding a third party interference, and people can really come out with the fact saying that this is not my child, this is not a legitimate child. So we should have well-equipped legal provisions to deal with some kind of problems. There have been cases, anonymous versus anonymous, all cases outside India, and People versus Sorensen. Now, in India, the aspect of legitimacy is of a child is governed by Section 112 of the Indian Evidence Act. So, I hope you all know what is Section 112. The essential ingredients of 112 are, please you can look into Section 112 because there is not much time. I have to cover a lot of things. But the things that the child should be born during the continuance of a valid marriage between the mother and any man. In case of divorce, the child must have been born within 280 days after such divorce and the mother remaining unmarried. And during the time when the child could have been begotten, the said parties to the marriage must have access to each other. So these are the essential ingredients of Section 112. Now, because of this, what happens is, when this provision is applied to a case of surrogacy, there is a judgment of Gujarat High Court in Jan Balaz versus Anand Municipality and others. Jan Balaz versus Anand Municipality and others. This is 2010, Gujarat 21. It was held that under the Indian Evidence Act, no presumption can be drawn that child born out of a surrogate mother is a legitimate child of the intended parents. so as to have a legal right to parental support, inheritance, and other privileges of a child born to a couple through sexual intercourse. The Gujarat High Court observed that the only remedy is a proper legislation drawing such a presumption of legitimacy. So that is a problem. Then the second problem can be when there is separation or breaking up of marriage. In the case of Baby Manjhi, Yamada versus Union of India, 2008 Supreme Court, where there was a Japanese couple, they had an arrangement of surrogacy with a woman, and later on they separated. So the husband refused to take the child. So in that case, it was decided by the Supreme Court, it was the grandmother of the child, the husband's mother, who took the child. So there can be problems. Then there can be also to refusal to accept the child in a case where more than one child is born through this arrangement. So they might refuse to accept more than one. And there can be cases where the child is born with a defect or deformity. Again, there can be refusal. And there can be problem for the surrogate mother as well. Because what happens in our society, all the people are not literate enough to understand. They are not aware. So there can be problem where people might say, no, she had physical relations with that man. Or there can be non-cooperation from the partner. There can be social stigma for the surrogate mother. So that's it. So that is why a comprehensive law is required on that. There have been surrogacy regulation bills from 2014, 16, 18, 19, 20. Finally, the 21 has made certain amendments in the 2019 one, which are positive also. Then surrogacy is legally allowed in Russia, Ukraine, Thailand. It is banned in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Ireland. But altruistic surrogacy is allowed in UK, Denmark, South Africa, Australia, Canada, and Greece. Now, by the 2020 amendment, it has not yet become an act. It is just a bill. But the 2020 amendment of the bill, they have in fact banned commercial surrogacy, but they have allowed altruistic surrogacy. Altruistic surrogacy has been allowed by the legislature now. So now come to the same-sex marriages. These are called gay marriages. They are also called as marriage equality. The first legislation legalizing same-sex marriages was, it took effect in Netherlands on 1st April 2001. It is legally performed and recognized in Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belgium, a number of countries, including UK and US. This is called marriage equality. Now, this is considered to be a human right and a civil right, as well as a political, social, and religious issue, because it is supported by human rights and civil rights organizations, medical and scientific communities, but it is vehemently opposed by the religious and fundamentalist group. It is considered an advantage. There have been studies, because the number one advantage can be it is financial, psychological, and physical well-being of Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
I
ma'am,
don't know
you
why
are
this
audible.
connectivity problem is cropping up by. Okay, fine. I'll continue. So it saves the gay people from social stigma and public discrimination. And there has been a study in US, nationwide study, between January 99 and December 2015, according to which establishment of same-sex marriages is significant, leads to significant reduction in the rate of attempted suicide among children, especially of a minority sexual orientation. That is, children of minority sexual orientation, it also helps them if a marriage takes place, because otherwise they want to go for suicide. Even they don't want to accept that. kind of a stigma. So with the advancement of society in same-sex couples and gays and lesbians are also looking forward to the surrogacy or arrangements to beget a child, or maybe by adoption or by IVF treatment. Now, in case of same-sex marriages, what can be the problems? The problems can be, you can change the slide, please. Turn video off. Oh, fine, okay. So it can be, if in case of separation or breaking up of these relationships, if both the persons refuse to accept the child, they might reject the child. So that's a problem. And there can be, again, questions of legitimacy, because the genetic material of neither of the parents is there, maybe. Or if the genetic material of one parent, one father is there, then there can be problems as to that there is no mother. So there can be this problem. In India, so same-sex marriages are not recognized. But the most important thing is that the Indian Christian Marriage Act, the Hindu Marriage Act, sorry, the Special Marriage Act, the Parsi Marriage and Divorce Act, the Muslim Personal Shariat Application Act, all these legislations, none of these codified marriages acts explicitly define marriages as between a man and a woman. Nowhere it is written. Section 5 of the Hindu Marriage Act says between two Hindus. It does not say between a man and a woman. So they neither do these acts explicitly prohibit same-sex marriages, but the laws have been interpreted not to recognize same-sex union. Now coming to the Goa Civil Code. In case of Goa Civil Code, in case of Goa, there is a unified marriage law, which people want to have in the whole of India. In unified marriage law in Goa, every citizen is bound to by the same law, irrespective of their religion. But in Goa Civil Code also, it explicitly defines marriage to be between members of the opposite sex. So Goa Civil Code may, despite having marriage, unified marriage law, they say that it should be between two different opposite sexes. So there are two pending cases in 2019 where two girls in UP, they want to get their marriage registered, and the registrar refused because there is no provision in which they could be married, and their advocate made a statement that they are going to go to the higher courts, and no idea about that, what happened in that case. In case of 2020, Kerala, two men from Kerala, they argued that prohibiting them from getting married violates several provisions of the Constitution. They wanted to get married under the Special Marriage Act. Now, same-sex couples will be covered under the live-in relationship. Now coming to, please next slide, same-sex relationships, sorry, live-in relationships, please. Live-in relationship. Now, it is an arrangement, just a minute. It is an arrangement of living where unmarried couples agree to live together and conduct a long-going relationship like marriage without getting married formally. It is not legally recognized in India because what is the reason for the people going for live-in relationships? It is usually getting prevalent in the younger generation. The reasons can be couples do not find benefit or value in the institution of marriage. Second, to test compatibility of each other before marriage. And third, financial situation prevents them from being married on account of marriage expenses. The large amount of marriage expenses which are required these days. So maybe some people don't want to go for spending. Maybe they don't have it, or they don't want to spend. Why to take loan from somebody and have a lavish marriage? What is the point of that? What is the point of that ostentatious presentation? So what is the difference between live-in partner, paramours, and concubine? Now, live-in partner need not only be for sexual relations. Live-in partnership can not only be for sexual relationship. In case of a concubine, a man cohabits in addition to his wife, he has a wife and he cohabits with another woman, it is basically called sexual slavery or avarudh stri. Then paramours, who are paramours or lovers, they do not live together. They are semi-permanent and there is a secrecy involved in that. They don't want anybody to know. In live-in relationship, they want everybody to know. So man pays for the expenses and or provides allowances to the paramour. Now in case of India, this live-in relationship is a social taboo. But gradually it has been accepted by the younger generation due to failure of arranged marriages and due to high rates of divorce also. So that is also one of the reasons. And these live-in relationships are not regulated by law. Not related by law. Rights, benefits, and commitments for parties in such a relationship are not laid down under any law. They are totally unprotected. No commitment laid down, no benefit, no rights. So, unlike a live-in relationship, in case of a marriage, a married woman, the parties are totally protected and their relationship is regulated. Now, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, in a way, it grants domestic violence protection to women who live in a relationship in the nature of marriage. Now, if we look at Section 2F of the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, now 2F says, domestic relationship as a relationship between two persons who live or have at any point of time lived together in a shared household when they are related by consanguinity, marriage, or through a relationship in the nature of marriage, adoption, or are family members living together as a joint family. So the term which they have used is they are related by in a relationship in the nature of marriage. They are not say marriage, relationship or marriage. It is, the term is relationship in the nature of marriage. So what happens is that there are 6 basic rights of a woman in marriage for financial, physical, and emotional security. First is right to maintenance for herself and her children. It can be under Section 125 CRPC. After divorce, it can be under Section 18 of the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act. It can be under Section 24 and 25 of the Hindu Marriage Act. The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 and the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act Section 18. So she has a right to matrimonial home, she has a right to stridhan, she has a right to live with dignity and respect, and she has a right to have a committed relationship and parental property. Now, what about the maintenance rights in a live-in relationship? There are recommendations of the Maliamat Committee report in 2003, amendment in the CRPC to cover these kind of women according to Supreme Court online blog 2019. The term wife under CRPC 73, it includes women who have been in live-in relationship for a sensible period of time for the purpose of alimony. Now, she's live-in relationship woman is covered under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Now, what about the rights of inheritance of children? Do they have a right of inheritance? They have a right of maintenance under Section 125 CRPC, but not under the Hindu law. So the children's inheritance rights, they have protection under Section 125 CRPC. In the case of S. Khushbu Kanammamal 2010, the Supreme Court held a live-in relationship comes within the ambit of the right to life under Article 21 of the Constitution. Live-in relationships are permissible and the act of two people living together cannot be considered illegal or unlawful. Now, we have the case of Dhannu Lal versus Ganesh Ram, 2015 Supreme Court. A couple living in a live-in relationship will be presumed to be legally married if they have been living together for a long period of time. Plus, the woman in such a relationship is eligible to inherit the property after the death of the partner. Plus, children born within a live-in relationship will not be considered illegitimate. So this is a very far-going 2015 Supreme Court judgment. Then in 2020, as reported in Hindustan Times, the Uttarakhand High Court held live-in relationships between same-sex couples are not unlawful. Again, very far-going. Held it is a fundamental right which is guaranteed to a person under Article 21 of the Constitution, which is wide enough to protect and freedom of choice, wide enough to protect inherent right of self-determination with regard to one's identity and freedom of choice with regard to the sexual orientations of choice of the people. Again, the Orissa High Court in 2020, same-sex live-in relationships are recognized under the Constitution right to life and equality. The court held same-sex live-in relationships are protected under the 2005 domestic violence law, similarly to different sex cohabiting couples. Then there's a case of Lata Singh versus State of UP 2006. They again said live-in relationships are permissible only in unmarried major persons of heterosexual sex. If it continues for a long time, cannot be termed in as walk-in and walk-out relationship, and there is a presumption of marriage between them. But if a spouse is married, man could be guilty of adultery. That is what the court said under section 497 of IPC. Now 497 IPC has been it has been decriminalized, 497. So in such a situation, there can be the other partner or the wife can go for divorce under section 13(1) of the Hindu Marriage Act. Then the case of Yamuna Bai versus Anantrao Shivam, 1998, the court in the case, the man having a lawfully wedded wife married second time, the second wife had no claim to maintenance under section 125 CRPC according to the Supreme Court, though she might be unaware of her earlier marriage. The court refused to give recognition to the fact that they had lived together even if the marriage was void. Then Malti was a State of UP. This is 2000 Criminal Law Journal, Allahabad High Court. In this, the woman, she was actually a cook in the person's house, and she was living with him, and she shared an intimate relationship with that man. And later on, when she asked for maintenance, she went to the court to seek maintenance. The court held the woman living with the man could not be equated as his wife because they refused to extend the meaning of wife under section 125 CRPC. Now the case of P. Veluswamy versus D. Pachayammal, again an important judgment, 2011 Supreme Court, Veluswamy. The court held that the parliament has already created a distinction between a relationship of marriage and a relationship in the nature of marriage, because this relationship in the nature of marriage has been dealt with under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. That means covering those relations which are not covered under the personal laws, only those relations. I'll just come to that. The court held that merely spending vacations together or merely spending a night together would not make a domestic relationship. So further, the court held there are 4 conditions which have to be satisfied for getting maintenance. The couple must hold themselves out to society or being akin to spouses. They should hold themselves out to the society, not hide it. Second, they must be of legal age to marry. Then third, they must be otherwise qualified to enter into marriage. That means they should not be within prohibited degrees. They should not have that spender relationship as per the personal laws. Then they should have voluntarily cohabited and held themselves out to the world as being akin to spouses for a long period. So a relationship in the nature of marriage could include all those relations which are not covered under section 125 CRPC, section 24 and 25 of Hindu Marriage Act, section 18 of Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act, because under all these legal proceedings for maintenance, there has to be a marriage under the Hindu Marriage Act or the Special Marriage Act. Now, the countries which recognize live-in relationships are France, Philippines, UK, Scotland, China, Ireland, Australia. In case of USA, there is a term called palimony. To grant maintenance to a woman who has lived for a long time, for a substantial period with a man without marrying him, and then he has deserted her. So, under the CARA guidelines, live-in couples cannot adopt children as per the CARA guidelines. They cannot adopt under the, I think, the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act, but I think they can adopt under the Juvenile Justice and Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. Then, what are the rights of children, inheritance rights of children? This is again a very peculiar situation because some of the courts are trying to bring them under Section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act, because Section 16 grants of the Hindu Marriage Act grants legitimacy to children void of void or annulled voidable marriages, provided they were conceived prior to annulment. So, but these children can only inherit from the parental property. So there was a case in 2020, 22nd March 2020, where it was held that live-in relationships are fine, but do not accept ancestral property. They cannot get ancestral property. They cannot go beyond Section 16. So in a way, it has been accepted that these children can inherit from their parents. Live-in relationship children can succeed to their parents' property only. Then there is a case of there is S. Ravanisa Dappa and another person, Mallikarjun. The court 2011, the Supreme Court granted right of inheritance to 4 children born of a live-in relationship. The court had nevertheless a relationship between parents. Birth of a child from such relationship have to be viewed separate of the relationship of the parents. It is a plain and clear as sunshine that a child born out of such relationship is completely innocent and is entitled to all the rights and privileges open to a child born out of a valid marriage. So the court has granted them rights of inheritance as well, because their children are innocent, they are not aware. So this relationship between parents has to be viewed separate from the relationship from the children. So in the case of maintenance rights of children, there is no right under the Hindu Adoption Maintenance Act, but there is a right under Section 125 CRPC. Now, again, there is another case. This is again Supreme Court 2007, Dimple Gupta versus Rajiv Gupta, right to maintenance to children born from a live-in relationship. That they also have a right to, same thing which was held by the Supreme Court in 2011. Now coming to custody and guardianship rights of children from live-in relationships. You have to turn to Section 6B of the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act. In case of Section 6B, it is the mother who has the natural guardian of an illegitimate child. So that can be seen also. Then come to succession. In case of, please turn the slide, succession. In case of succession, there is a journey of property rights of women. In the Shastric Hindu law, there used to be the concept of women's estate, then there used to become which she could not alienate the property, and on her death used to revert back to the to relatives of her, the legal heirs of her last full owner, that is husband. These people to whom the property used to revert back were called reversioners. So the woman's estate, on her death, her legal heirs could not inherit. So there was a concept of Stridhan, which was of the gifts which she was given to on her marriage by her own relatives or even by the husband and his relatives. So this was Stridhan, of which she was the individual owner of the property. But in case of Stridhan also, there is the concept of Saudayaka and non-Saudayaka. That is Saudayaka, of which she was absolute owner, and non-Saudayaka was where she could not spend, it was in the control of the husband till he died. So what happened was, by the 1956 amendment, she was, by Section 14(1), all the property which she had, whether it was limited estate or not, it was converted to her absolute ownership by Section 14(1). So she became an absolute owner. It was a very reformatory provision, a very women emancipatory provision. Then further, by the 2005 amendment, the daughters were made, ancestors, and they also had the right of birth, the right by birth. But then there was the question of section 6.3. The question was, section 6.3 very clearly says that if the father, 6.349, just a moment, huh? Section 6.3. Section 6.3 says, when a Hindu dies after the commencement of the Hindu Succession Amendment Act, his interest in the property of a joint Hindu family governed. So that means if he dies after the commencement of the Hindu Succession Act, only then the daughter is allotted the same share as that of a son. But the problem arose where the father died prior to the passing of the Hindu Succession Amendment Act, that is 9 September 2005. So there the daughters, these daughters whose father was died before 9 September 2005, they have suffered a lot. They were not getting any right to property. So in that situation, we have, there are cases on that. That is, there were contradictory rulings, two rulings which came. First was Prakash versus Pulvati, 2016 Supreme Court, a two-judge bench decision. Please you can turn the slide. Now, in case of 2005, it was held, in the case of Prakash Pulvati, the benefit of 2005 amendment could be granted only to living daughters and living co-partners as on September 9, 2005. That means the section 6 was prospective in nature and would apply if the daughter and co-partner were both alive on 9 September 2005. So that was, then another judgment came, again two-judge bench judgment came, Dhanamma versus Amar, 2018 Supreme Court. In that case, again, the Supreme Court, they said that section 6 would apply retrospectively. That means if the father died prior to the passing of the 2005 amendment, that is 9 September 2005, in that situation also, the daughters would get a share equal to that of a son. Now, because of this different provisions, finally in 2020, Vinita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma, the Supreme Court ensured the right to equality. They said that the co-partner rights in a Hindu undivided family property or equal rights to family property by birth, irrespective of whether the father passed away before or after 9 September 2005. So they very clearly said that the daughter's right arises because her right by birth. It has nothing to do with the death of the father. Even if the father expired prior to 2005, even then the daughter is going to get a share because the right of the daughter was one bestowed by her birth and would remain unaffected by the date of the father's demise. Now the Vinita Sharma impact, this case we can call it, the court said a son is a son till he gets a wife, while a daughter is a daughter throughout the life. And they further said that we can call it is a step towards women's emancipation. But the problem remains that the mindset of the people. Who knows that people, it is said that people from big families, they can go for, instead of giving a share to their daughter, they can easily create a will or do other kind of documentary things to prevent the daughter from getting a share. So that can be possible. So, but still, let's see how the mindset is taken care of. So another thing is, quickly want to go through is that the section 15.1 and 15.2 of the Hindu Succession Act. 15.1 says that if the woman dies without leaving any children or children of predeceased children and a husband, the property, first of all, if she dies, the property goes to her children and husband. They are class 1 heirs. If they are not children or children of predeceased children and husband, the second is the husband's relatives, husband's legal heirs. And after that comes the wife's legal heirs, her parents and her mother or father. So this is basically objectionable because of the case of Om Prakash versus Radhacharan. In 1999, it was a case where a woman, she got married. Within 3 months of her marriage, the husband died due to a snake bite and she was thrown out of the family saying, वो अच्छी नहीं है, she बदशगुनी वगैरह करके, she was thrown out. She was taken care of by her own family. She was educated, she got a good job. The only problem was that she did not leave a will, and she did not marry again. So when she died, when the brother filed a suit for this thing, succession certificate, the husband's sister's children came forward to claim, because under 15(1)(b), it is, they can claim maintenance, 15(1)(b). So the share was given to them. So the problem is there is no provision in the Hindu Succession Act regarding women to have about their self-acquired property. There has to be a provision. And moreover, when intestate succession to the male property, we have section 8 is there, 9, 10, 11, 12 is there, and we have the schedule under when class 1 heirs, class 2 heirs. Why can't we have schedule for class 1 heirs and class 2 heirs for females also dying intestate? Because that is the problem. Even the self-acquired property goes to the husband's legal heirs. So that is a problem. So that has also been taken care of. There has been a Law Commission report also which suggests amendments to this effect. Then we come to the last one, that is a matrimonial property. This matrimonial property concept is again coming from foreign countries, where in case a woman is a homemaker, she is investing so much in the house, she is taking care of the whole family, she is, maybe cleaning, cooking, taking care of the children, rearing the children, doing everything, and she is not contributing financially to the family. It is a husband who is contributing financially. So in a number of cases, the husbands, they buy property in their name, and finally when these people, maybe there is a divorce or they are separating or judicial separation, the property is in the name of the husband. The wife doesn't get anything. What she gets is only maintenance. In case of Muslims, only dower and only maintenance as per till the Iddat period, as per the 1986 Act. So there is a concept of matrimonial property, that there has to be some kind of division of this matrimonial property between the spouses. So if we see section 27 of the Hindu Marriage Act, where the property which the parties had got jointly at the time before or at the time of marriage, that has to be divided between the parties. Even section 27 of the Hindu Marriage Act does not deal with any kind of property which was acquired jointly, or which was acquired after marriage, or which was acquired prior to marriage individually by the parties. So this kind of studies are now coming up, that there has to be a division of matrimonial property. There has been some work done in Maharashtra also, but still there are still bills and nothing else has come so far. So that's it. Yes, I'm done.
Thank you, ma'am, for your exhaustive session. Next, we have some questions put forward by our students.
Okay.
I would like to put it to you one after another. There have been many questions, out of which I have selected, and those the repetitive I have excluded, and I would like to put it to you one after another. The first question is that, has the change in lifestyle of the modern generation made them more intolerant? This is with respect to the hike in filing of divorce cases in India. Your view, ma'am.
Yeah, you are in a way right, because in one of the sessions which we were having, when the student talked about constitutionality of the resolution of conjugal right, that a woman should have, if she should not be, forced back into the matrimony. There were people who were saying that women have to be tolerant and they have to take care of that is what the Supreme Court also said when they were saying that it is perfectly constitutional. So it is, maybe they have become intolerant. So that is why, no, it is not only intolerant. I would not use the term intolerant, because they are getting educated, especially women. If they are getting educated, they are getting qualified. That maybe the sense of tolerance and what is expected from them to be obedient has now gone away. They are no more, they cannot call them obedient. If they are working, they are contributing everything. Because even if a woman is working, even then she is taking care of the household. So she is having double duty. So why will that obedience and tolerance come from? Right?
Right, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to the next question. Ma'am, do you think India and India's judiciary needs some more time to become mature enough to accept the ideas like same-sex marriage?
Yeah, definitely not in the judiciary, even the society should be able to accept it. Because if we can say live-in relationship is a taboo, even surrogacy is a kind of a taboo. And same-sex marriage would be definitely a very big taboo. So not only the judiciary, I think our legislature, judiciary will come afterwards. It is basically the society which has to accept it. It is our which has to accept it, because basically we are very traditional. We don't want to adopt because children are adopting, but we don't want to adopt. There is a generation gap. Generation gap, definitely.
True, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to our next question. Ma'am, do you think students need to be counseled properly to have a compassionate and accepting attitude towards their classmate having different sexual orientation and not to bully them due to their different nature?
It should be there. Definitely, counseling should be there, because in the present scenario, I think there has to be counseling for when there is counseling for mental health also, when there should be counseling for this also, because again, bullying, you have a lot of bullying in like in America, a lot of bullying is there. Students बहुत bully करते हैं एक दूसरे को, but I think at least we are better than that. But still, there has to be some kind of compassion, and that not only comes from counseling, it is the job of the parents also. It is basically the parenting which should be in which we have to teach the children to be compassionate towards others. There are students school में बच्चे, if somebody uses specs, उसको इतना bully करते हैं. So it is basically the parenting, and later on, if it is required, it can be counseling. So parents have to do this job.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Moving on to our next question. Do you agree, ma'am, on the point that Veluswamy versus Paschaimal was a progressive decision upholding constitutional morality?
Progressive and upholding constitutional morality. No, in that case, it was basically held that one night stand, and actually, I'm sorry, I have not read the judgment, the whole judgment, because I was not given time. So, कब कहा आप लोगों ने ये करने के लिए? So I have just tried to put everything together. So it is, we can say, progressive judgment है. Judgment progressive बहुत सारे हैं जो मैंने आपको बताए हैं. There are a number of which are progressive, especially the case which was in which they gave right of inheritance to 4 children born out of live-in relationships. Yes.
The next question is relating to live-in relationship, ma'am. Are children born out of live-in relationship more vulnerable related to their succession right to the property of parents? What is current position of law?
That is what I just now said, no? Because there is a view that since they are not covered under Section 16 of the Hindu Marriage Act, Section 16, you know that about legitimacy of children born of a void or a annulled voidable marriage. So basically, one view can be that these children are not part of a marriage. They are not born out of a marriage, within a marriage, sorry. But then the courts have come forward and said, no, it is not the actually fault of the child. The child are basically innocent. That is why they have given these progressive judgments. The latest one, which I had just now said. कौन सा था वो? I just now said the judgment. This is Revana C. Dappa versus another versus Mallikarjun, 2011. That right of inheritance was given to children of these live-in relationships, because they have also said that they have been living together for a long time. The presumption is that they are a married couple. Yes.
True, ma'am. Moving on to our next question, ma'am. Whether the surrogacy law in India is ample enough to address all the issues?
Whether
the surrogacy laws? Yes, ma'am.
No, they are not. Actually, they are improving upon the surrogacy. It is not a law, it is just a bill. They have come up with a number of bills. And the latest bill 2020 is better, because earlier it was that if the parties, husband and wife, had to wait for 5 years and get an infertility certificate, they said 5 years is a lot. So they say 1 year, wait for 1 year. If they are infertile, they can go for it. And earlier it was said that only a relative woman can go as a surrogate mother. Now they are saying that no, because it becomes difficult to get women, any intending woman can go for that. So insurance amount has also been increased. But the point is that maybe there are some quarters which are against it. So that is why they have not been able to come up with it. The act is still not an act. Yes.
Right, ma'am. Moving on to our next questions. Ma'am, what is the difference between traditional and gestational surrogacy?
In case of traditional surrogacy, I said no. It is the surrogate mother's own egg, which is fertilized in a lab with the sperm of maybe the male intending partner. And then it is implanted in the woman's womb, in the womb of the surrogate mother. So in that case, the female commissioning parent has no role in that. It is only the genetic material of the surrogate mother and the male intending partner, which makes the embryo. So here the surrogate mother is the surrogate mother is the biological mother of the child. The commissioning mother has no role in that. In case of gestational, it is the sperm and oocyte of the intending parents, which is merged in a test tube in a lab, and then it is implanted in the surrogate mother's womb, meaning thereby that the surrogate mother is not providing any genetic material. It is genetic material of both the parents. That means uski legitimacy में कोई problem नहीं आएगी, because it is their biological child. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to our last and final question. Ma'am, during your discussion, you gave an example of a Japanese couple who has deserted their child or not took delivery of their child from their surrogate mother. Now, in such situation, can the surrogate mother has any right towards that deserted child? Because through time, it is very normal that such surrogate mother develops an emotional bonding with her child.
No, the problem is, it is very common that the mother can develop, but if under the surrogacy arrangement, there's a contract signed, she has to hand over the child to the parent. Or it is usually that the women are married, because unmarried women, they in their will also say don't involve unmarried women in that. So in case of married woman, a surrogate mother, she has a husband also. So do you think the husband is going to accept the child? So it is basically very problematic for the surrogate mother, because in very easily the other partners refuses to accept the child. In cases where maybe one of the party has contributed the genetic material, in that situation also people refuse. There have been cases that people refuse. No, I'm not going to provide any maintenance to such child in case of breakup or divorce. So in such cases, it also depends on the contract also. And then in the act also, in the law also, they should take care of that. The rights of the surrogate mother have to be taken care of. She has no rights of the child, and the agreement also, she has to hand over the child and hand over all her parental rights to the problem arose because the Japanese couple, they had, in the case of baby Manji, that they had had a surrogacy arrangement, and later on they separated. Jab separation ho gayi, to fir they said, don't want the child. So the matter went to the Supreme Court, and finally it was the mother of the husband who was called. She called and she took the child. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. We come to the end of this session for the question answer session. Thank you so much, ma'am, for elaborating each and every provisions and each and every burning topic so clearly and pointing out the latest judgment, the facts and issues so clearly. I hope our students has been benefited by this program, and thank you once again on behalf of Geeta Ratan International Business School and Center of Legal Studies, Geeta Ratan International Business School, for accepting our request and becoming our guest for today. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Today's session comes to an end. We hope we will meet in another session soon. Till then, you all take care and have a nice day. Thank you.